A man is grinding three gray powders together over a low fire, searching for the one thing every emperor before him has wanted and never gotten. Not gold, not land, immortality. It's the 9th century, somewhere in the mountains of Tang Dynasty, China, and this alchemist, one of hundreds chasing the same impossible prize, is about to fail so spectacularly that his failure will outlive every emperor he ever served. He mixes sulfur, charcoal, and a strange white mineral called saltpeter. He heats it, and instead of eternal life, the bowl explodes in his face. No one in that room understood it yet, but they had just invented the thing that would end more human lives than almost anything else in history. Not a poison, not a curse, a powder. So how does a failed immortality potion turn into a bullet fired 800 years later on the other side of the planet? Stay with me, because this story runs through Buddhist monks, Mongol horsemen, Ottoman soldiers, and a Japanese island that changed the shape of war forever. Let's start with the powder itself, because the recipe is almost absurdly simple. Saltpeter, sulfur, and charcoal. That's it. 3 ingredients any 9th century pharmacist already kept on a shelf, because all 3 were used in Chinese medicine. Saltpeter was even prescribed for skin conditions. Nobody was trying to build a weapon. They were trying to build a cure for death. And instead, they built something that released oxygen so violently when heated that it didn't just burn, it detonated. Chinese alchemists called it huoyao, fire drug. Not fire powder. Fire drug. That name alone tells you everything about what they thought they were making. The earliest written proof we have of the formula shows up 2 centuries later, in the year 1044, inside a military encyclopedia called the Wujing Zongyao, the complete essentials for the military classics. By then, the ratio had been refined to roughly 3 parts, saltpeter to 1 part each of sulfur and charcoal, and it was already listed alongside siege equipment. But for the first 100+ years after that alchemist's accident, nobody used this stuff for war at all. They used it for noise. Fire drug became the star ingredient in firecrackers, thrown into bonfires during festivals to scare off evil spirits. A tradition that some historians think is even older than the powder itself, originally done with plain bamboo that popped when heated. Now, the bang was bigger, louder, more satisfying. For a full century, gunpowder's entire job was making people jump at parties. Somebody, eventually, looked at that explosion and thought, this could kill a person. By the 10th century, Chinese engineers were packing the powder into tubes of bamboo, lashing them to the tip of a spear, and lighting the fuse right before a charge. They called it the huoqiang, the fire lance. It wasn't accurate. It wasn't reloadable in the middle of a fight. But for about 3 terrifying seconds, it spat flame and shrapnel directly into an enemy's face, and that was more than enough to break a charge or defend a wall. The first solid record of one actually working in battle comes from the Siege of Dayan in 1132, where defenders used fire lances to hold off attackers during a prolonged assault. Word spread fast. Within decades, engineers were stuffing the bamboo tubes with broken pottery shards and scrap metal, the very first hint of shrapnel, turning a simple flamethrower into something closer to a shotgun. Bamboo eventually gave way to bronze because bronze doesn't burn through after 1 shot. By the 1200s, Chinese armories were casting handheld bronze tubes capable of firing multiple projectiles from the same weapon over and over. Historians now consider these the first true hand cannons on Earth. Alongside them came something even more frightening. Cast iron shells packed with gunpowder, nicknamed the thunderclap bomb, and the heaven-shaking thunder cannon, designed to detonate and throw metal fragments in every direction. This was no longer a magic trick for festivals. This was artillery. And then the Mongols showed up. When Mongol forces laid siege to the Jin Dynasty capital of Kaifeng in 1232, they ran directly into these weapons and did what conquering armies have always done with technology they can't beat. They took it. The Mongol Empire, at its peak, stretched from the Pacific Ocean to the edge of Europe, and it functioned like a single, unbroken highway for ideas. Paper, the compass, printing, and now gunpowder, all moving west along the same trade routes carried by the same armies, faster than any idea had ever traveled before. By the early 1300s, cannons start appearing in European manuscripts. The earliest known image is a squat, vase-shaped gun from 1326, drawn by an English clerk named Walter de Millimet, firing what looks like an oversized crossbow bolt. Nobody knows exactly how the knowledge crossed that final stretch from the Islamic world into Christian Europe. But once it did, it detonated something bigger than gunpowder itself. For 1,000 years, a castle wall meant safety. A knight in plate armor meant you were nearly untouchable on a battlefield. Cannons ended both ideas within a couple of generations. Stone walls built to survive a battering ram or a catapult crumbled under sustained cannon fire. Armor that could shrug off a sword did nothing against a lead ball moving at a few hundred feet per second. The entire military logic of the medieval world, walls, knights, sieges that lasted years, started to collapse. Europe adapted the only way it could, by rebuilding everything. Military engineers designed a completely new kind of fortress. Low, thick, angled walls shaped like a star so that cannon fire would glance off instead of smashing straight through, and defenders could cover every approach with crossing fields of fire. It's called the Trace Italienne, and versions of that star-shaped design were still being used to build forts 300 years later. But the more dramatic shift wasn't happening on castle walls. It was happening in soldiers' hands. Sometime in the late 1300s and early 1400s, European gunsmiths solved the biggest problem with early firearms. You needed a free hand to hold a burning cord to the touch hole every single time you fired, which made aiming almost impossible. Their fix was a simple curved arm called a serpentine, mounted on the side of the gun, which held the burning cord, the match, and snapped it down into the powder pan at the pull of a lever. That's the matchlock. For the first time, a soldier could hold his weapon with both hands, aim it roughly at a target, and fire without juggling an open flame. The matchlock spread almost everywhere within a century. The Ottoman Empire's elite Janissary corps were using firearms as early as the 1440s, and by the Battle of Diu in 1509 and later engagements against Portuguese forces, gunpowder weapons were standard issue across the Islamic world. In 1543, a storm blew a Portuguese trading ship off course and onto the shores of Tanegashima, a small island south of Japan, and within a single generation, Japanese smiths weren't just copying the matchlock, they were mass-producing it to a level of craftsmanship that impressed the very traders who'd introduced it. China, the country that started this entire chain reaction, ended up re-importing an improved matchlock design from Japan and the West centuries later, calling it the bird gun, a strange, quiet irony for the place where fire drug was born. These early matchlock muskets were brutal to carry. Some models weighed over 20 pounds, needed a forked wooden stand just to aim steadily, and took nearly a minute to reload. So armies fought in mixed formations, rows of musketmen protected by rows of soldiers holding 16-foot pikes, because a musket alone was useless the moment cavalry got close. That combination, pike and shot, dominated European battlefields for the better part of 2 centuries. The next leap solved a different problem. Cavalry, moving fast, couldn't manage a lit match at all. In the early 1500s, gunsmiths, likely in the German states, developed the wheel lock, a small, spring-loaded wheel that scraped against a piece of pyrite to throw sparks into the powder. The same basic principle as a modern cigarette lighter. No open flame required. It was expensive, complicated, prone to jamming, but it let a mounted soldier fire a pistol one-handed while controlling a horse with the other, and that alone made it worth the cost for cavalry units across Europe. Then, around 1610, a French gunsmith working for the royal court, Marin le Bourgeois, combined the best ideas from everything that came before into a single mechanism, the flintlock. A spring-loaded hammer holding a shard of flint struck a steel plate, throwing sparks directly into the pan, all in one smooth motion triggered by a single pull. It was simpler than the wheel lock, more reliable than the matchlock, and cheap enough to arm entire national armies with. Within a few decades, the flintlock had become the standard firearm across Europe, and it would remain the dominant weapon on battlefields for roughly 200 years. Secure repertoire de n'atteindre Wow, Dorar et diabri ne rare sins. Or rebrand fee. Orgy breed a red rusher in creative reparations and Napoleon's entire career. One more invention finished the picture. Early bayonets had to be jammed directly into the barrel, which meant a soldier literally could not fire and stab at the same time. Late in the 1600s, someone designed a bayonet with a socket that fit around the outside of the barrel instead of inside it, meaning a soldier could now fire his weapon, then instantly lower it with the blade still attached. That one small redesign quietly ended the need for separate pikemen entirely. A single soldier could now do the job that used to require two. It would take until the early 1800s, with the invention of a small percussion cap containing its own explosive chemical struck by a simple hammer, for the flintlock to finally become obsolete, kozowadi, anchting kaldawan, closing out a chain of innovation that had run, unbroken, for nearly 1,000 years. So trace the line all the way back. A powder invented by monks searching for the opposite of death, carried across a continent by Mongol horsemen who never intended to spread it, reforged by Ottoman soldiers, Japanese gunsmiths, French court armorers, each one solving whatever problem the last version left behind. Nobody sat down at any point in this story and designed the gun. It arrived in pieces, shaped by 1,000 years of soldiers, engineers, and accidents on 4 different continents, none of them talking to each other, all of them chasing the same basic question: how do I survive the next fight? The alchemist who mixed that first batch of saltpeter, sulfur, and charcoal was looking for something that would let him live forever. In a strange, backwards way, he found something that's still deciding right now, on battlefields somewhere in the world, exactly how long other people get to.